Great. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Tania Haigh. I'm the co-founder and president of P.A.X.A, Parents Against Child Sex Abuse. And tonight marks a very special night for us because we are kicking off a core program for our organization called the Conversations Program. Now, you might have been hearing a lot about conversation here, conversation there. There's something in the air about having all types of difficult conversations. And one around child sexual abuse is critical, which is why I invited two very special ladies to help us with our inaugural kickoff program as we embark on rolling out more conversations throughout the balance of the year. As we all know, child sexual abuse is a very difficult topic for most. It has historically been known as a taboo topic. However, we've been seeing some shifts in the last decade from survivors coming up and telling their own stories through the Me Too movement. A lot of courageous folks out there expressing their stories that have given us even more insight and perspective about child sexual abuse. What does that look like? Who is it done by? And I know that through the strength and courage of survivors and the stories that we've survived ourselves, as well as with people that we care about in our organization, we have learned so much from their experience that has helped inform the work of P.A.X.A. So thank you for being here with us. We are so excited to have this very important conversation that is going to be really foundational of why the stigma. And then because of the specialty with our two guests, we're going to really dive into educator abuse as well. So once again, I'm Tania Haigh. I'm going to be facilitating the conversation. I'm the co-founder. My other better half co-founder is David Haigh, my husband, and we could not be more proud to have this moment with you and the both of us along with our board. Thank you for your support. Okay, so first up, I'm going to go ahead and have great pleasure of introducing our first guest. Her name is Terri Miller, and she's the president of Stop Educator Sexual Abuse, Misconduct, and Exploitation, Sesame. She's successfully lobbied the Nevada legislature to pass a law that prohibits sexual conduct between certain employees of the school and pupils. She kept taking this skill further. In 2001, she and the Nevada Coalition Against Sexual Violence successfully worked together to amend the law to recognize offending school volunteers and to protect even more students. So this doesn't even accurately set her up fully with all of the great successes she's had under her belt alongside with the work that she's contributed to Sesame. She's educated audiences across the country through numerous appearances on national talk shows, conference presentations, and countless articles. So we have an incredible expert with us about educator abuse. She's got lots of stories to tell. I'm going to go ahead and give her the floor so she can say hi before we introduce our next guest. Hi, Terri.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to be with you on this inaugural event. Great job, Tanya.
I'm so happy to have you. We're going to dig in a little bit more, okay?
Okay, sure. Be happy to.
Next up, okay, we are welcoming Faith Colson. Faith is an advocate for child protection. Growing out of her personal experience as a survivor of sexual abuse, Faith has been working to get legislation passed in Illinois to better protect students from abuse in schools. As a mother of 3 children currently attending public schools, Faith also serves on a task force in another state that looks at school-based mental health services. Faith's passion is driven from her to resolve it. Here we go. I'm going to have Faith give us a little wave. Hi, Faith.
Hi. Nice to be here. I'm really glad to be here. I'm coming from North Texas and very glad to be on the call.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, here we go. So I have a lot to talk about with you ladies. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can add a pin. All 3 of us are on here now. So I'm excited to dig in with you gals because we're already working on very interesting projects together. So we talk a lot, but I wanted to use this opportunity to kind of take a step back in the world of child sexual abuse and dig in because we all have had different experiences of how this epidemic has impacted our lives. So I would like to start out with kind of talking to each of you to get your perspective on why is there such a stigma about this topic? I'm not sure who wants to go first.
I'll go first. Well, first of all, historically, we send our children to school fully expecting that it's the safest place for them to be outside of the home. We have we expect that it is the safest place. But when abuse is happening within the schools by the very people entrusted to educate and care for the children, um, it's devastating. It's such a betrayal of trust, and it's such a shameful thing that happens that it's very, very hard to have conversations. The first thing that comes from a school district when something happens like this is, oh, student safety is our number one priority, and they want to make sure that everybody knows that. But the fact of the matter is, a child got hurt at school, and there's not being enough done to educate and prepare for these types of offenses that happen. So I think it's a cloud of shame. Nobody wants that cloud of shame, over their school, and it's all kind of talked in hushed conversations.
And why do you think that is, though? Like, aside from the educator abuse piece, like, what is it about, just historically, your perspective on, let's say, if we were to compare child sexual abuse to a topic that's talked a lot about, like opioid addiction, for example, like, why there are other dark topics that are really tough to wrap your head around, but what is it about CSA that makes it makes it our job so difficult on a daily basis?
Well, again, it's the shame and humiliation that exists,
Exactly.
and nobody wants that upon their school. Other teachers don't want that cloud over them that's brought on them by the offending teachers or other school staff. And so it's very difficult. It's very difficult when it's someone within the school community that is the offender, as opposed to a child being offended outside of school by someone else. Schools do a really, really great job of putting in mandated reports when they suspect abuse of a child by someone either in the child's home or someone else in the neighborhood, but they don't take that same initiative when it's one of their own within the school. They think they have to do this investigation. They're questioning the student. They're interrogating sometimes the student together with the perpetrator. And that just sets up a whole course of action that leads to a tainted case for prosecutors and law enforcement to investigate later on. It is not their duty to investigate. It is their duty to report and get it in the hands of the trained investigators that investigate child sexual abuse.
Great, well said. Faith, what's your take on child sexual abuse? And obviously that ranges from 0 to 17 plus.
Yeah.
Or 18.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Like, why is this such a stigma? Why is it so difficult for people to drive change, to accept versus deny? Like, what's your perspective?
Well, I think the first and foremost reason why there's a stigma is it's uncomfortable. Number one, it's no one wants to believe it's real. It's hard to grasp it in your mind, so you don't want to think about it. So that's just the plain fact of it. No one wants to think about it, and unfortunately, most don't think about it until it happens. But I think the other thing is that the very nature of sexual abuse is that it's done by someone you trust in almost all cases. And so Terri, of course, is talking about when that person you trust is an educator. A lot of times that person you trust is in the home. And so the very people who are supposed to be keeping you safe from these types of atrocities are the ones perpetrating it, which is what makes it so hard for the child to speak about it. But also then the child ends up carrying the shame of the abuse instead of the perpetrator. So I read this in a book about trauma, but it was saying how silence always protects the perpetrator. And the perpetrator asks you to do nothing, but by doing nothing, the perpetrator is always helped. And the victim needs action. And A lot of times bystanders are ignorant of what to do and ignorant of how to recognize it. But because this is a crime that is done by people in trust against someone who is vulnerable, who can't speak up, I think where I've seen the biggest gap is that there's not a lot of bystander awareness, because it is a very uncomfortable topic. And I don't think most parents realize how prevalent it is another reason there's a stigma. I think most people think they don't need to talk about it because it's not going to touch their family. And unfortunately, this is a type of situation that, it doesn't hold back on any demographic. It affects all children of all backgrounds. So it is something that people need to talk about, not because it happens to every single child, but it happens to a huge percentage of children. So I think it's a matter of people not knowing how prevalent it is. And the very nature of it is it's by someone you trust. So it's hard to get it exposed to a safe person that can help.
Yep, I think that's perfectly captured. I agree with you. I think that because of the silent component of it, we call it like the silent epidemic. It's just people don't want to talk about it, the sexual nature. And for those folks who are not predators, this is like the last thing they want to think about. They're just like, they're not angling to look at children as sexual little beings, but for the predators who are thinking of kids like sexual objects, like that is their like obsession and their focus, right? So they go out of their way creating all these different layers of protection to make sure that if they were to get identified or called out, they've created this little network of supporters to make it so difficult to believe,
Right. And
yeah, go
Absolutely,
ahead.
yes.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think that's another misconception that people have. Number one, when I was a kid, stranger danger was the creepy guy in a black trench coat. And that's all, he might grab you and take you to his car, but that's not what it is. It's by
Right.
people the kids know and trust. And it's the people you least expect. They're the ones who know how to charm, not just the kid, but the parents. They blend right in, and that's why they're able to do it. And I think that's the other misconception. Parents don't understand how common it is, and parents don't understand it's the people that look safe I mean, that's how they get away with it. So
Yes.
that doesn't mean you should be scared of every person, but it does mean you need to have safe guidelines. Like institutions need to have safe policies to keep kids safe, and parents just need to be aware of how to supervise their kids and stay in touch with them and be aware of the adults in their lives so that they don't accidentally expose them to someone who they think they can trust, because those are the people doing this are people inside of that circle of trust.
Right. That is exactly right, Faith. And oftentimes this can be spotted. It can be spotted by parents. If their child is spending an inordinate amount of time with a particular teacher, that's a warning flag. If there's a lot of secrecy, if there's withdrawal from friends, if the child seems to be isolating themselves and communicating with a particular teacher incessantly, that is another warning flag. For guidance counselors in schools, if a student is enrolled in a teacher's class, but then they're participating in every single activity that the teacher supervises, and they're maybe taking stats for that teacher. Maybe they're not even on the team, but they're taking stats. Just all of this time spent. That is one of the biggest warning signs. To put eyes and ears on. And then, of course, looking to see, is this child coming to school early, going into the teacher's classroom before school starts, spending the teacher's prep period in his or her classroom, having lunch together, with the teacher in a car out in the parking lot. These are all kinds of things that are very visible and bystanders need to look out for.
Absolutely. I think what I'd love to build in with you gals, because you're both moms, we're all parents here. So one of my beefs being a parent is this concept that starts very early on. I don't know who came up with this, but when something's happening with your child, especially when they're maybe on the younger years, that they're going through a phase, and kind of this adage of, oh, this is just a phase, like this too shall pass. When really there could be some like very key behavioral indicators that something is going on with that child. Is someone abusing that child? Is he or she being bullied at school and that child's not talking about it at home? So for me, I think some of the parental blinders is that we kind of tell each other these stories because, hi, there's no manual to be a parent, right? We don't get a
Right.
parenting handbook. But the ones that
Right.
do exist, like what to expect when you're expecting, what to expect the first year, there's no information in there about how to protect your children from predators. It's all this
Right.
other stuff. But just like we teach our kids safety, we should be teaching them about body safety. And if somebody does something to them, what to communicate to the parents, and for the parent,
Right.
be the number one advocate for the child. So I think
Right.
like from a parent point of view, that's where I really want to kind of hear more from you ladies also is we all wear our different hats, whether it's, you know, running this nonprofit or advocating for legislation and different changes or for stopping educator abuse. But for me, it's, you know, there's a disconnect between like what parents get information or they don't, very little so far, which is why we launched P.A.X.A. And then like kind of being in tune with your child and then believing your child. Any thoughts about any of that?
Oh, absolutely. Start early. It's never too early to start. From the moment you have that baby, you start early and just make it common knowledge. You have all of these other conversations with your child. Don't touch a hot stove, you know, don't knock this over or that over, don't climb on a shelf. You know, this just has to be on that same level
That's right.
and very matter of fact. You know, these discussions so that they grow up learning to talk and trust you with anything that's happening in their life. And yeah, just, and there's so many great programs out there, you know, for this type of parental training. So, you know, again, they don't come with a manual, you know, so it's up to us as parents to be proactive and get that information ourselves so that we can best protect and rear our child's, you know, in healthy environments, no matter where they are.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I think that there's the component of making sure you have open lines of communication with your child and addressing things like body safety and being the first, you know, being your child's primary sex educator, you know, talking to them about things like that, just age appropriate conversation so that you remove the stigma and shame just between the two of you, you know, between parents and children, so they know they can come to you with anything. So that's one component. And then I think the other component is just being aware of what's going on in their lives, being attuned, that Tanya used that word, just attuned to what's going on, but also aware of the adults that they spend time with. So it doesn't mean that no adults can be trusted, but you know, if someone's spending an inordinate amount of your child, you know, time with your child, why are they doing that? You know, are they always wanting to give extra help? Like, and maybe they are, but you know, stop in and check, talk to your child, you know, show up unannounced, things like that. Because I mean, basic supervision is also part of this, where you just, you know, knowing where your child is. And I'm not saying that in a way of blaming parents for when stuff happens. I don't mean it that way, but just being aware of the adults they're interacting with and having those feelers up for, if the two things, that the simplest way I can boil it down, if I was talking to a parent who knew nothing about this, is the time they're spending with adults. Is there an inordinate amount of time spent with one particular adult? And is that paired with changes in behavior? Because the types of signs that can show abuse are also indicators of a number of other things. I mean, they could be from other stressors, anxiety, like you said, it could be bullying. There's so many different ways that kids display distress, and it could be from a number of different, you know, inputs. But those two things together to me are the biggest red flag, when there's the huge amount of time or desire or like fear of spending time with an adult paired with that change in behavior. Because you know, I've heard one speaker say, you know, their child got super, you know, quiet and reserved, but another child got more outgoing. Like, it doesn't, not every child is going to follow the same pattern, but those two things together to me are the biggest indicators. And what Terri was talking about, you know, spending the time with the teacher, being withdrawn from friends, like that is a playbook of what happened to me. And my mom knew something was wrong, but she didn't know what. And I've heard that from other survivors, or read that about other survivors. The parents, they know something is wrong, but they don't know what. And then unfortunately, then when they finally found out, they feel all this guilt because they're like, but I knew my child, but how could I have prevented this? And it's not their fault. It's not their fault that another adult did this, but that's why education and being aware of that is so key. So that you do feel empowered to know what to do about it, because my mom, and like I said, other mothers of survivors, they knew something was up. They didn't know how prevalent this problem was.
Exactly. Just in my own experience, I had an experience as a witness when I had just graduated from high school. We had a family friend who was a teacher in our school district, and we used to babysit for his children. Everybody hung out at this teacher's house on Friday nights after the games. He was married. They had these championship, award-winning, Labradors that we all just loved. And my sister was struggling in math, and because he was a family friend and we knew them well, my mom hired him to be my sister's tutor. And so that was going well until his authority started wielding into her personal life. She had a boyfriend of 3 years. He would start, telling her, oh, you didn't get good grades this week, you can't go out with so and so this weekend, you need to study more. And and so this went on for a period of time, and when she got a good grade, he would celebrate with her, extravagantly. And Christmas, and another thing that happened was, I have an older brother. He took both my brother and I and his wife 3 hours away to Busch Gardens, Busch Beer Gardens, and let us drink beer, and as we were going through. And so this is how this teacher was grooming my brother and I to be in alliance as allies for him.
Yep.
And
you, when I was trying to say red flag.
Yeah, huge red flag. So we were being groomed. We didn't know it. But now, because our parents would have been very upset with the fact that we were drinking at underage. And the big joke that night was that I wasn't getting carded. My brother was 18 months older than me, and he was getting carded. So, but anyway, that's how he got, got his grip on my brother and I. So then when my mother would be saying, oh, this isn't right, I'm uncomfortable with this, we would just say, oh, Mom, come on, it's just so and so, and we would be defending him. So consequently, what happened, my sister did get a good grade at the end of the year, and he wanted to take her to the most expensive restaurant in town alone with her, without my parents or his wife along. And my mother said no. And then at Christmas time, he showered her with very, very expensive gifts. And my mother said, nope, you have to give those back. He's not going to be helping you anymore. And she intervened and stepped in. She was done. And so that was kind of my first experience with this whole grooming thing, and I didn't know what it was at the time. Like I said, I was just right out of high school. And so anyway, so when here I am, a few years later, had just had my third child, joined the local aerobics class, 1983. And I'm told by the aerobics teacher, was married to this other teacher, that she had come home and found him in bed with a high school student. My oldest child was 4 years old at the time. And I was concerned enough, because we had just moved into this very small community, and I knew my children would one day go to that high school. I called the principal the next day, and I told him that his employee, because this aerobics teacher was also a math teacher in the high school, and I reported what she said to me. And I said, what are you going to do about it? And he said, without a victim coming forward, there's nothing we could do. Well, complained for many years to law enforcement, to prosecutors, to other principals that came into the high school. And I complained for 11 years. And everyone throughout that time said, without a victim coming forward, there's nothing we can do. My oldest daughter did enter high school. I was forbidding her from taking any of the courses he taught. I was protecting her from him, and her education was being stifled. I filed a formal complaint in 1993 that resulted in an investigation to really no good end. And it was after that investigation that the teacher started running for school board in 1994. And I said, I'll be damned if he's going to get on that school board. And so I took it upon myself to conduct my own investigation to find the victims that everybody said they needed. And consequently, he did win the primary. He did win the election. But as a result of my investigation, I found over 60 witnesses willing to come forward against him in his 20-year teaching career. And he was charged with 3 counts of sexual assault. He consequently pled an Alfred plea and was sentenced to 5 years to life. So that's the story that got me into this advocacy realm, because once I saw that it was a systemic problem within the school district and school system, this mama bear was on a mission. And I was bound and determined to fix the system. And that is what I have done through legislative efforts, through speaking engagements, bringing awareness, and really fighting for student protections under Title IX, and you name it. I mean, I have gone every avenue on this and have learned firsthand how, from filing complaints to the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. So all of those firsthand experience I've had in lobbying for legislation, in getting policies enforced, getting Title IX investigations, that has been my role now at Sesame, to advocate for survivors, to show them other avenues to justice outside of the criminal and civil justice systems.
Wow, I think I've heard parts of the story before, and I'm really happy that you just shared that with our audience, because it is such a powerful story and so many layers to it. So first, how long this has been going on. And hopefully now with the work of Sesame, and including some of the work that Faith's taken on, like we're going to really shrink those timelines and like get rid of some of those like bad apples, so to speak, in the educator system, which we know so many educators have such a great dedication and passion, and they are safe teachers. But let's not kid ourselves. Predators look for environments where there are children that feed their pipeline and access. That is that simple. It's one of those like kind of foundational elements that we talk about at P.A.X.A. It's like, well, no kidding. These folks are just showing up. So sometimes you'll hear, and it could sound like bias because men are, it's the data is out there. The majority of predators are male. We know women do it too. There are plenty of cases that have surfaced up that we know from a national perspective. It's not new news. Sometimes they're helping facilitate or enable the male predator. But it shouldn't be a shocker. That's where they want to be. And that's why it needs to be a lot more difficult to be in those environments, to have those kinds of jobs. And I know that's some of the work that we're going to get into later. But Faith, I want to talk to you about something, because we've come across other advocacy groups and individual stories of moms like your mom who their kids were older, 15 plus, where they're able to look a little bit more mature, their bodies have developed, they have a personality, they've got their opinions. And then there's the adult. There's a predatory teacher who's just giving that child more attention. And yes, they are still children at 15, 16, 17. That attention that they're not getting at home, like they're feeling flattered. And then all those grooming tactics leads them down this path of a relationship. And I would love to help, because I know there are different dynamics when the little ones can't talk and articulate what's happening with them, but then the challenges that come when you can talk about it. But then if your mom comes to you, or if a parent goes to a kid, like asking like, why is he texting you? Why is this happening? And maybe you do everything in your power to just hide it because you want to protect that relationship. So can you give us some perspective about that? Because that's really tough for the parents who've got teens and they're kind of paying attention, whether it's I was in an environment, teeny tiny story. It was my tennis class. It was not part of my school system. I was maybe 14 at the time, but I was with a group of 14, 15, 16. And our tennis instructor was attractive and like 25, like hanging out with the teenagers. Then it was like, oh, they're dating? Like, how is that okay? That is not okay. You know, but he was attractive and he was charismatic and we all kind of got comfortable with him. But I remember like he creeped me out. I didn't care how cute or attractive he was. I just knew like those dynamics were not correct, you know? And that's one of those stories that really stays with me about that whole experience of they're like going out when clearly that's not appropriate, you know, and how many predatory tactics did he have on other, you know, like teens?
Yeah. So to speak to that, I do think that's an important distinction for parents and for educators to understand, anyone in a youth serving organization, that it's going to look different when the victim is an older child or teenager, because the tactic isn't scare them into silence. It's kind of swoon them into silence by making them feel like they're in love with you. So in my case, my perpetrator was my junior year physics teacher. And in January of that year, he asked me to stay after class so that I could, you know, he could talk to me about college and career options because I was very good in his class. And that turned to, do you want to go to church with me? That turned to, he's a mentor and a shoulder to cry on. I did find him attractive. So there was kind of the crush thing, like, I hope I find someone like him one day kind of thing going on. And then, you know, by the time from January to May rolled around and he kissed me, well, now there was a brief moment where it was kind of like, that was kind of weird. But within just a couple weeks of that, it was criminal sexual assault. And of course, but to me, it was consensual at the time. And I stayed with him until I was 21 years old. And what's scary is there are several other survivors I have read about or spoken to that had a very similar timeline, 17 to 21, 17 to 25, 15 to 24, things like that, where that's really scary to me, that it's not just common to be abused, but common to stay that long. And honestly, it took me, I think, developing to where I had my own voice to walk away to do that. But I didn't call it abuse until I was 34 years old. And what changed it for me was being a mother and seeing how trusting children are and realizing that he took advantage of me. And that component, like you said, of you protect the perpetrator, I've heard just that's not talked about. And I think that's another piece that's missing in education circles is people are trained, educators are trained very well in some ways to report abuse that is happening outside the school. You see marks, kids are acting different, and they make those calls and they're saving a lot of children. Educators are making a huge number of calls to Child Protective Services to save children. But unfortunately, those warning signs, like what you talked about, your tennis coach, where he's hanging out like a peer, that's a classic warning sign, but most people don't know that. Or, you know, they're making inappropriate comments like, oh, she has nice legs, about students, like, and it creeps them out. They think, oh, that's off. Wow, he's kind of weird, but surely he'd never do anything. And I think it really is. People think I would never do that. I have no desire for one of my students. I would never cross that line. So they kind of just write it off. And that's what concerned me when I found out the extent of that at my school, the extent of the comments and the behaviors that my perpetrator was displaying, that people remembered almost 20 years later. They remembered the comments he was making. They remembered rumors of him being with a student. Several people knew that he said he was in a relationship with me. And in my case, I actually think it hurt me that I was a quote good student, because they called me in because of the inordinate amount of time I was spending outside of class. But I told them, oh, nothing's going on. And my sister told me, she's like, Faith, they believed you because you were a straight A student, you were a varsity athlete, and they didn't think you had any reason to lie. And I think there's all kinds of demographics where kids fall like, oh, well, you can't believe them, or oh, we should believe them. And really it's adults failing in their job to protect children. Adults should not be hanging out with students as peers. Adults should not be making flirtatious romantic comments, sexual comments about students. But the problem is the bystanders hear that and they don't see it for a danger. They see it as, oh, that's scandalous. Oh, let's talk about it. But they don't see it as child abuse. And I think that is a misconception.
It is absolute professional misconduct.
Yep,
I
absolutely.
sent my kids to school to get hit on by a teacher.
Yeah. And
Right.
in my case, the police officer who investigated what my perpetrator confessed to what he had done when I was 18 years old. And so his therapist reported it, even though I was of age. DCFS said they wouldn't investigate. Well, when the cops called me in, one of the police officers actually said, yeah, I can see why he's attracted to you. And I told that to someone years later, and they're like, that guy was hitting on you. I mean, like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's and that's why the law that we're trying to pass right now is trying to lower that threshold of like, no, these are dangerous behaviors. These do need to be reported. People who are displaying these behaviors, maybe there's not the evidence to bring forward criminal charges, which that threshold is very high. But yeah, they don't need to be employed here. We can't send them to jail for it, but they don't need to be employed here if they are seeing children as prey.
Yeah, they don't need to have the privilege of being an educator, which it is a privilege because educators get a special halo. You know, they get a special halo because, oh, look at what they're doing. They're educators. Except with that powerful combination of the creepy educator, then you can make like special excuses for that person. Oh, he's such a charismatic. He's volunteer here, and then he ends up betraying a whole school because of what he gets caught doing.
Yeah.
Right.
Terri,
yeah, Tanya, this is, you know, this problem just goes so, there's so many facets of it and so many facets that are neglected, you know, and addressed. So first of all, think about this. Our children will spend 13 years of their lives, 9 months out of every one of those years in school, and they're mandated to be there by law. There is nothing that is protecting them, and we don't have the assurance that the people and adults they're going to encounter in those schools are fit to serve them. Law enforcement, military, they all go through these fitness examinations. I grew up in a military life. I married a military man. I know the security clearances, you know, and those processes and how extensive they are. You know, so, but yet our teachers are not vetted in the same way, and they're spending all of these years and time with our children for most of their lives. So that's the other problem, is there's no background checks are a false sense of security, because this type of case very rarely gets reported within a statute of limitations. So those that are offending our kids in school don't have criminal histories to be found in fingerprint background checks. So there has to be another way to vet them, to find out if they have an offending history. And the only way to do that is through the course of their application to a school. We have a law that was named after our organization called the Sesame Act. It originated in Pennsylvania. It was modeled after two other states' laws, Washington and Oregon. And what it does is when a person applies for a job at a school, whether it is as a contractor, credentialed employee, or non-credentialed employee, they first must self-disclose on a form whether or not they have ever been the subject of investigation, disciplinary action, non-renewed, had their license, you know, suspended or revoked for sexual misconduct. Then they must also sign a waiver and list every of their previous employers where they worked with minors, to be able to disclose that same information and on a form answer those same questions. And then those other previous employers are required to respond within a certain time frame. In Pennsylvania, it's 20 days. So this is how we find out who has the history of engaging in sexual misconduct with students. And then not hiring them, of course, and not passing them from one jurisdiction to the next, because that's the other problem. The Sesame Act prohibits the use of confidentiality agreements, separation agreements, and any form of aiding and abetting a person to be hired in another school jurisdiction. So that prevents that practice of passing the trash so that they can't go somewhere else. Yeah.
Love the passing the trash.
Yeah, trash belongs in the can.
That's right.
Trash belongs in the can. It doesn't belong in our classrooms.
That's right. You get one fine
And
it's a trash, piece of trash. You put it in the trash bin.
you throw it
on it.
right. And the can in this case is jail, imprisonment, because these are child predators that have irrevocably made a drastic difference in a child's life, and have set that student up for a lifetime of coping, and they're sentenced to a life sentence of coping because of the actions of this bad apple adult that violated them and betrayed our trust, and we've got to stop it.
So I want to just hop on and build on that, Terri, is for those of you who are watching and don't think yet that you have firsthand experience or some kind of relation to a pedophile. All three of us have had that experience. And believe me, not only from what we've experienced, whether it's to us or around us, there's scores of stories that, pedophiles leave town. When they're under the lens, whether or not they get caught, whatever their situation is, they're looking for that next hop, that next situation. I've heard a story from a lawyer where in the state of Illinois, there was like a bad apple teacher who got caught for predatory and sexual abuse. They didn't do much, like nothing was reported, skipped town, got on the highway, and I think there's like a highway that cuts across Illinois east-west, just went down like, I don't know how many miles, 150 miles to another district to then do the same thing.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do is, like, through these honest conversations on behalf of P.A.X.A with women like you and other guests that we're going to have, is like bringing more perspective and light to like real situations that happen. Pedophiles hop town. If they're married to someone, they're in trouble. Like, honey, we're out of here. We're bringing the kids. There's a lot of these very real stories that I've heard firsthand from victims and survivors about all these little tactics that they do. So predatory teachers, they're in that category. Preachers, they're in that category. And like the list goes on. And I just want to emphasize that point with folks, because we're really trying to bring a new dimension to all of these, especially with those of us who have experienced it, in a way that other organizations are not talking about these types of things.
Right. Tania, there's been so much done for other youth, with regard to other youth serving organizations, so much more done. Look at what's happened with the Olympic athletes. I mean, right away, there's been some federal legislation passed, to protect them from coaches and doctors and the people that have, that have been found to offend them. Boy Scouts is another one. The churches, but the huge thing with this, when we're talking about the numbers of children that have been harmed in our schools by the entrusted adults, we're talking about 1 in 10 children. That's over 5 million children enrolled in our schools today. And our children are not mandated to participate in amateur sports, Boy Scouts, or even go to church.
That's right.
They're mandated to go to school, and we must demand as parents that their protection and their safety is also mandated, and make sure that the people that are serving our children in these schools are deemed fit to serve them. And if they are not, the schools are not their place. There is no place for them in a school for predators.
So Faith, I would love to turn it back over to you, because there has been some effort for a while underway to help equip schools to do a better job in educating their pupils, if you will. So we've had some other champion survivors. Do you want to talk a little bit about Aaron's Law, and then some of the work that you're doing to help close these gaps in the school systems?
Sure. And I'll start by saying Aaron's Law is the household name in Illinois. So most people who have heard of um, sexual abuse prevention in schools, that's the name they know. There's here in Texas, there's a survivor named Jenna. Her law passed. Here it's Jenna's law. It passed in 2009. Aaron's Law was a year or two later, and it has passed. Some form of that type of abuse prevention curriculum type of law has passed in over half of the states. So like you said, there is a shift, and there is more awareness now than there was 10 years ago, which is good. In Illinois, we're actually working right now, not in Faith's Law, but in another, effort to strengthen Aaron's Law so that it is for more grades, and so that it's a shall instead of a may for the curriculum for students. Just because there are a lot of stakeholders, for example, from the Make Safe Task Force that met last year that wanted to strengthen the existing law. So yes, she is a champion for children that has helped. And the one area where I have seen that to go beyond what is in Aaron's Law, as far as that focuses on training the children, which is an important component. Where I was failed wasn't, children being trained or not, it was bystanders not being aware of those dangerous warning signs. So the legislation that I have been more behind with Representative Michelle Mussman is more so to draw attention to the personnel so that they know what those warning signs are. And like we've talked about, to lower that threshold so that instead of just waiting for someone to be criminally charged, which is very difficult because of underreporting and because of evidence. And like I said, if you have a 17-year-old who's not willing to come out against her abuser, that's very hard to go after a criminal case, depending on what other components are there. So the goal there is to lower the threshold. So instead of everything hinging on criminal charges, you can still have definitions of inappropriate behaviors that could constitute grooming that we're labeling sexual misconduct, so that maybe you're not being criminally charged with something, but you can be dismissed or disciplined for, those inappropriate, unprofessional behaviors, like making sexual jokes with a student, or I'm trying to think what else is there, dating, soliciting a date, going for those one-on-one outside of your professional role meetings where you're isolating the student in an effort to lure them into unlawful sexual behavior. So there's some other components as well where we strengthen the criminal code. So right now in Illinois, it is legal for a teacher to have sex with a student who is 18 and up. So there's no recourse for parents if they find out that their teacher is sleeping with their 18-year-old child. There's nothing that can be done criminally. So that is another component that I was very big on when I first reached out to Representative Mussman, was that needs to be fixed, because the nature of the trust and the power differential makes it abusive. I don't care. When I went to school when I was 17 and then the next day I turned 18, it's just as abusive. Nothing changed. I didn't get to refer to my teacher as his first name and go out, socially. He was still in charge of me. I'm still mandated to be in his class, like Terri said. He still has power over me and my future. So we need to protect students from predatory behavior there. So that's another thing that was very important to me, was protecting those older students, because I don't think most parents, anyone I've talked to that lives in Illinois who has children, is shocked that that's still legal. I don't think parents know. And one of the things that really scares me is what do the parents of my peers think, who didn't know this was going on? And my school hid this and put it under the rug when this person, they let him resign. And when it came out with my delayed outcry, they gave very selective facts to the newspaper. And I just wonder, if I'm a parent of one of my best friends, what am I thinking about how the school hid this? They saw these warning signs. They tried to investigate it internally. They never reported to DCFS. Then they found out a teacher was having sex with a student. They let him resign, and no one knew. No one knew. And I mean, again, that's just one of those things. People don't understand that how schools cover their tracks, and some of the nuances to how, especially the criminal charging process takes place. So I don't know if that answered your question. Sorry.
Yeah, I know you gave us a lot there, and I wanted to end, but I do want to turn it to Terri, because Terri, we're in Chicagoland here, P.A.X.A, and it made nationwide news when the Chicago Tribune published a series of reports exposing CPS and their missteps around child sexual abuse misconduct by teachers. And CPS, for those of you out there who are not from the Chicagoland area, it's the third largest public school system in the country. And I believe, being someone who's from this area, that it gives them even a bigger responsibility to do the right thing, to be a model for other school systems. So when all that broke out and all those missteps and failing students, we're also known for a lot of tension between CPS, the school district, and our teachers unions. So one of the things that we've been trying to like unearth little by little, and I know it's kind of, some people don't want to go there, is that we're starting to wonder at P.A.X.A, like, are these adults truly putting children first? I mean, do they really care about the kids? And what fires me up even more is that my tax-paying dollars are paying for the salaries of the administration and the teachers. And when I hear budget this or these woes or there's shortage, so we just need anybody, like, give me a break, you know? Right. So what are your thoughts? I know that you're in Nevada, but you've got such a great national scope.
Wow.
I have no words about some of the challenges that we know. They've put other steps in place. We know this. So not to criticize too harshly on them, but we do recognize that there's still some rubs there and some tensions based on some of the work that we're doing together.
Well, you both know the frustrations that we've all been living through, with Faith's law, HB 1975, that's, currently making its way through your legislature. Originally, Faith's law did include the language from the Sesame Act, and it was calling for that employment history review. It was calling for the ban of the use of the confidentiality agreements, the ban on allowing, this passing of the trash by allowing them to resign and quietly go away and push it under the rug. Yes, they say that, the protection and safety of the students is their number one priority, but their actions don't prove it. The proof is not in the pudding. And because recently, all of this language, the Sesame Act language, has been gutted from Faith's law, and it will not be a part of her law this session. So that is very frustrating. And the reason that this was gutted, it was gutted at the behest of the School Board Association and the teachers unions in Illinois. They wield a great amount of, and guess who negotiates those separation agreements and confidentiality agreements?
There you go.
The teachers unions. They're the ones that swoop in when these cases come to light, and they negotiate these agreements that allow for this person to not be reported to law enforcement, to evade, prosecution. And then they're given letters of recommendation. Gag orders in these confidentiality agreements are placed on administrators from giving negative referrals. And this is how they pass the trash. And so these are the folks, the very folks who have colluded, but yet they're the ones that are given deference by the legislators, to pull this kind of language out. Well, you know why that is? Is because they contribute
to their campaign
thousands and thousands of dollars to the legislators' campaigns. Absolutely. And so they've got them in their pocket. So this is the biggest problem. Every time the Sesame Act has been adopted in 4 other states since Pennsylvania passed it in 2014. My state is one of them. Maryland, New Jersey, and Connecticut are the others. And in every one of the states, it's been the teachers unions that have been the ones that have spoken against it, and it's been a real battle to get them to to come around. And it's usually been because there has been a very huge scandal, in those particular states that has been the catalyst for, getting laws changed. we were behind the first federal mandate ever to address this issue. And it's in the Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015. It is a prohibition on aiding and abetting sexual abuse in schools. And what it does is it mandates every state to enact policy, regulation, or legislation that prohibits the use of confidentiality agreements or any type of aiding and abetting of a sexual predator in our schools. Right now, there's only 11 states that have complied with that. I'm happy to say that we were told by the US Department of Ed that the top 5 states that have complied with the Essa provision are those with the Sesame Act language enacted. And there's 39 states that are still out of compliance. Illinois is one of them.
That's right.
And so the Department of Ed is currently conducting a study on states' compliance and non-compliance. And that final report from SRI International for the US Department of Education is due out next month. So we are hoping, because we sit on a 5-member technical working group, an advisory team for this grant study. And we are really hoping that our recommendations were heard. We're hoping that there's going to be new federal statutes that come as a result of this study. We're hoping that there's going to be even stricter mandates for child protection in our schools. Of course, more enforcement of Title IX in our K through 12 schools to make sure that all of our districts are in compliance and fully following the guidelines of Title IX by making sure there's Title IX reporting officers. Title IX is the protocol to handle this, but nobody knows about Title IX. We should have all known as students. We should have all known as parents. And yet yearly we should be hearing about it, and we know nothing. Even schools don't know about it. I did a presentation for school attorneys and asked them, how many of you know if your Title IX guidelines are in place, and who are the Title IX officers in your districts?
Yeah.
Nobody raised their hand in a room of 150 school attorneys. Nobody raised their hand. So again, there's got to be more awareness, more information, more better legislation, and drilling on it, just like fire drills and inclement weather drills and gun shooting drills. More children are being harmed by educator sexual misconduct than have ever, been shot, but got injured in a fire. Did you know that there's zero kids that have been injured in a fire in schools? Zero. You know why? Because our schools do fire drills.
Yep. I'm feeling your energy, Terri. I'm feeling your energy. I mean, at the end of the day, our kids need to be safe in schools. We can't have adults having professional misconduct. This career path can't be just like some creep's backup plan, like all these excuses about why some people end up as teachers. I know some of those stories. So I really appreciate the time that you took tonight to educate our viewers about some of the history, the steps that you've been putting into place with Sesame, how there's still clearly so much opportunity by state level to pass some of these laws. Like Faith mentioned, Aaron's Law, or whatever name it might be in your respective state, instead of you don't have to do it, but it's there for you to make it maybe mandatory. I didn't know that until my daughter's in a school where they were executing on Aaron's Law. I didn't know that not every school was doing it. I thought, oh, my school is doing it. Everybody's doing it. I found out that someone else who sends their kid to private school, they're not doing it. What a disservice to children. What a disservice to children to not put those steps in place. and to have the courage
Right.
to do those types of things. So we're going to be wrapping up here. So I'd like to give each one the floor for any like wrapping remarks of what you'd like to leave our what we call like our parent audience, as well as adults who care for the well-being of children. So Faith, if you could go ahead and make some of those remarks, we'll give you the floor.
Sure. And I don't know that I'll be able to think of all the things. And then I'm sure when I get off, I'll think, oh, I should have said one more thing. But I think
No,
I
yeah.
think as a parent, the biggest thing I can say as far as how to help your own child is just to know your child, spend time with your child, listen to your child, be attuned to your child, know who they're spending their time with, know adults and friends they're spending their time with, be aware of the types of situations they are in so that they aren't in, more vulnerable situations, unnecessarily. That's just the biggest generic advice I can give. And yes, starting young, talking about body safety and things like that, and just making sure they're comfortable talking to you about anything as much as you can. And of course, at different stages, that's going to look different. But just trying to, at least in your relationship with your children, to foster healthy views and open views about sex and safety and things like that, so that they will come to you and feel safe coming to you. I really appreciate Terri's story about what her mom did, that when she did see things, she said no. And she didn't let her children convince her otherwise. And I think that's a very good example of strong parenting, that when you see that red flag, it's your job to do that, whether or not your child loves you for it or hates you for it, because you're protecting your child. So I think that's a very good example of where they started to see those warning signs and they did something about it. I think that's an excellent thing to remember as someone who did it right. I think if something has already happened in your family, what I would say to the parents is to not let your guilt overwhelm you, and just to know that you can't, you're not the one who abused your child. And don't take that on, that it's your fault when you're not the perpetrator. What your child wants is for you to love them and to put their needs first, not to get overcome in your own guilt, because your guilt isn't going to change their outcome. So, learn what you can, and from this day forward, do what you can, but don't let that consume you, because that's not going to help your child, and you're not the one who abused your child. And every parent I know of who's lived through this has felt that way. And I can tell you, from as a daughter to my mother, I don't want her to spend her time wallowing in that. I want her to stand with me, and I want her to learn from that, and to use her voice where she can, because she's not alone in feeling that way. And that's not the person who should be feeling that guilt. And then lastly, I mean, if you are interested in getting more involved legislatively, I would just say reach out to your local representatives and say, whether it's Faith's Law or calling up the Pass the Trash, raise attention to them and say, what is being done about this? I want this fixed in my neighborhood, in my community, in my state. So there is a lot of legislation right now that is addressing. Our bill is not the only one looking at teacher misconduct or privacy of sexual abuse victims, but reach out to your representative, because I'm one voice, but one voice and a year or 2 years of work and a lot of other supporters who've come along the way. We just passed the House last week, and you can make a difference with one voice. So that's where I'll leave it. And I just want to thank Tania for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, wow. This has just been amazing to be able to get this type of awareness out there. I do want to make sure that everyone knows where our website is, sesamenet.org. We are a network of support for survivors, for students, for parents, for professionals, for teachers. We were founded by teachers. We don't want the whole school community to suffer, because of the bad apples. Like I said before, bad apples do spoil the whole bunch, and it makes it hard for everyone. The cost of educator sexual abuse is astronomical. First of all, to the victims. Like I said, they are forced and thrown into a chasm of coping for the rest of their life. And we have heard the stories straight from them, for decades, and they are heart-wrenching and heartbreaking. But the common thread throughout all of the stories is the systemic failure. the systemic failure to see it, to intervene, and to stop it. That's the common story for all of them. This is a life-threatening child safety issue. I know too many parents who no longer have their children because their children have committed suicide. I know too many survivors that have disclosed that they've attempted suicide. And it is the one child safety issue that lies within the halls of our schools that is still being ignored far too often. So we need to do more. We need to be able to recognize it. Our website is full of resources for educators, for parents, for friends, for survivors. We have a multifaceted team of advisors who are the nation's top experts in the field on this subject matter. Some of them have been advisors to Sesame since we were founded in 1996. I became a member in 1996. I've been serving as president since 2001. I have spent my entire life, adult life, fighting this issue. Like I said, I made my first report when my oldest child was 4. She's now in her 40s. And so I have vowed that until I take my last breath, this is my purpose in life. And I plan to see it through. Every survivor that comes to me with looking for our advocacy and support, I am there to the end. I try to cross that finish line with them, no matter what their choice of justice is. And that is very, that is really the reward, is to see them rise up as phoenixes from the ashes of what happened to them in school that just should not have happened.
Thank you.
But to see them rise up and become, and see them, empower them, and to see them do what Faith is doing now, making change for the better for students in the future. That's one of the greatest healing avenues a survivor can go through. And it is my privilege. It really is my privilege to serve them. And so please find us at Sesame, help us to stop this huge problem and make school the place that it ought to be, a place for safe learning, a place to prepare our children for success in life. And as Frederick Douglass says, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men.
Thank you, Terri. Wow. Wonderful ending. Thank you all so much. Terri and Faith, thank you so much for joining P.A.X.A for this very important conversation. For those of you who are watching, you can see why they are very special individuals, special guests with very strong messages for all of you. And I want all of you in our audience to just recognize that there are so many champions around this cause to keep our kids safe. So many survivors like Faith who've really stepped up with some incredible courage, having survived a very difficult situation, to then see the wrongs and then turn to make more impact. So we are really here to help continue to bring to the light a lot of the resources and channels beyond what P.A.X.A provides, because until we got into this work almost 4 years ago, we had a very difficult time ourselves as parents finding the support that was needed, when we dug a little bit much deeper, these moments of crisis come and you don't know where to go. So that's why we created P.A.X.A. So more information at www.paxa.online. We're always looking to build our community of parents and adults, healthy adults that support the well-being of children through all of our social media channels. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, and on YouTube, which is where this is going to be posted. So thank you again. Please be on the lookout for more information for our next conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thanks.